Hello again, welcome back to the Wide Shut webcast, the show that brings you news and analysis without the pro-globalization spin of the government and the corporately controlled mainstream media. Today's main article on the website looks at the Eurozone crisis, which is a crisis of the EU, which quite obviously wouldn't be a crisis if there wasn't an EU. But anyway, IMF says UK should do more quantitative easing. Christine Lagarde has basically come out and said the crisis in the EU is getting worse and will have a knock-on effect on member countries, including the UK. So, in order for this undemocratic, unelected EU superstate to keep functioning, and for the corrupt financial system that caused the crisis to remain in place, Britain may have to do another round of quantitative easing. And for those that aren't too sure what that is, we've got an in-depth article on the site that goes into it. But basically, the Bank of England are creating billions of pounds out of thin air. Straight out of thin air, like magic. And that's not hyperbole. They literally have the right to create new money with no underlying asset, and what they're doing is giving it to the corrupt financial system. The very banks that gambled and created these extremely risky bubbles called derivatives that caused the economic recession. But because they failed and caused the economic recession, for some reason they get free money from the Bank of England. And this supposedly makes it more likely that they'll lend some of it out to businesses, lend some of this new money out to businesses to get the economy growing again. In other words, businesses taking out loans and getting into debt to hopefully grow again. Trouble is, we've done quantitative easing twice already, and it doesn't work. Mainly because they're under no obligation to actually lend the money they're giving out again. And it's basically just more of the same. Bailing out the establishment while screwing over the little guy. It's not enough that we had to bail out the banks and get further international debt, causing us all to face cuts. But now they're creating all this new money, which in the long run, any savings we do have will be devalued. Because creating billions of pounds out of thin air makes every other pound in your wallet worth less. I don't know, how about we have the novel idea of a vote, whether we should have the IMF and the EU dictating to us? How about that? Oh right, that would be freedom and democracy, something we don't really have. Going on to our next story, expanding on this EU dictatorship. Another story I briefly covered today. EU overrules French anti-GMO decision. That's right, the French people and the French government decided that they were going to ban Monsanto's privately owned, patented, genetically modified maize. They wanted to ban it in favour of natural, non-monopolist maize, you know, the kind of maize that farmers have been using for decades and decades. Well, according to the authoritarians at the EU Food Safety Board, tough, because they say France has to allow Monsanto to monopolise that industry. And even though France submits studies and scientific evidence again and again to the EU ignores it. A bit like how a few years ago the UK papers ran with the story that GMO was just as good as natural produce, even though when you followed through and actually read the reports and the studies, it actually shows that natural produce is far higher in nutrition than GMO food. For more details on these stories and other headlines of the day, please go to wideshut.co.uk or click the links in the info box down there somewhere.